Picture this. You wake up, but something is deeply wrong. The usual hum of the city is gone, replaced by an unnerving silence. You step outside, and the streets, normally bustling with morning commuters, are deserted. You walk to your local bank, hoping for answers, but you're met with cold, locked doors and a hastily written sign. Closed indefinitely. A knot of dread tightens in your stomach. Your money, your security, is trapped behind that glass. Overnight, the abstract numbers on a screen have become a brutal reality. The stock market, the engine of the global economy, has seized and collapsed. Trillions of dollars in wealth vanished into thin air. The life savings you meticulously built over decades, gone. It's not just you, it's your neighbors, your friends, your entire community. Suddenly, the most basic necessity, food, is no longer a guarantee. Long, desperate lines begin to form, not for the latest gadget, but for a loaf of bread, a bowl of soup. The ripple effect is catastrophic. The great industrial heartlands that built our modern world fall silent. One by one, factory gates are chained shut. The roar of machinery is replaced by the quiet shuffle of thousands of workers being sent home, their futures uncertain. A palpable fear hangs in the air, thick as the smog that no longer billows from the smokestacks. The promise of progress has been broken. This terrifying scenario isn't a scene from a dystopian movie. It's not a hypothetical nightmare. It is a ghost from our own history. This exact sequence of events unfolded less than a century ago, plunging the world into a decade of despair. It was called the Great Depression, a cataclysm that reshaped nations and left a scar on the psyche of humanity. The world swore it would never happen again. But as we stand here today, surrounded by our own fragile economic systems, the question echoes louder than ever. Are we truly safe? Or are the seeds of that same disaster being sown right now, waiting for the perfect storm to erupt? In this investigation, we will journey back to the Roaring '20s to uncover the hidden cracks in its glittering facade. We'll dissect the chain of events that triggered the collapse, from reckless speculation to flawed government policies. We will witness the human cost on a global scale, from the Dust Bowl of America to the political turmoil in Europe that paved the way for a Second World War. Most importantly, we will place the past and present side by side. We'll analyze the parallels, the debt bubbles, the wealth inequality, the lightning-fast flow of global capital. Are the safeguards we've built since the 1930s, the regulations, the safety nets, strong enough to withstand the pressures of the 21st century? Or are they merely paper walls against a coming flood? And that's the system we're decoding today. To understand the Great Depression, we can't start in the breadlines of the 1930s. We have to go back to the party. The Roaring '20s. Fresh off a victory in the Great War, America was bursting with a new, defiant energy. It was an age of rebellion and innovation, a decade that seemed to promise limitless prosperity for all. On the surface, the nation was a whirlwind of excitement and progress. This was the dawn of the consumer society. For the first time, millions of Americans could afford to buy the tantalizing products rolling out of factories. Cars, once a luxury for the rich, became commonplace thanks to Henry Ford's assembly lines. Radios connected the nation, bringing news and entertainment into the living room. Homes were being transformed by electric refrigerators, vacuums, and washing machines, all made accessible through another modern invention, consumer credit. Buy now, pay later. It was the American way. Cars, once a luxury for the rich, became commonplace thanks to Henry Ford's assembly lines. Radios connected the nation, bringing news and entertainment into the living room. Homes were being transformed by electric refrigerators, vacuums, and washing machines, all made accessible through another modern invention, consumer credit. Buy now, pay later. It was the American way. In the cities, a new skyline was piercing the clouds. Skyscrapers, monuments to American ambition and engineering, rose in New York and Chicago. The economy, fueled by this relentless production and consumption, seemed unstoppable. Many believed the country had entered a new era, a permanent plateau of prosperity where poverty would soon be a thing of the past. But this glittering facade concealed deep structural cracks. The first and deepest crack was in the heartland. During World War I, the government had urged farmers to expand production to feed war-torn Europe. They took out massive loans to buy more land and new machinery like tractors. But when the war ended and European farms recovered, global demand plummeted. American farmers were left with a mountain of surplus crops, which caused prices to collapse. They were producing more than ever, but earning less. Drowning in debt they couldn't repay, many began losing their farms long before the Wall Street crash. American farmers were left with a mountain of surplus crops, which caused prices to collapse. Drowning in debt they couldn't repay, many began losing their farms long before the Wall Street crash. This agricultural crisis directly threatened the second weakness: America's banking system. The nation had over 30,000 banks, most of them small, independent, and operating with very little capital. They were deeply intertwined with their local communities. When farmers defaulted on their loans, these rural banks were the first to fall. And in the 1920s, there was no safety net, no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. If your bank failed, your life savings vanished. This inherent fragility created a system ripe for panic, where the failure of one small bank could trigger a domino effect of fear and collapse. When farmers defaulted on their loans, these rural banks were the first to fall. If your bank failed, your life savings vanished. And then there was the third weakness, the one that captured the nation's imagination: the stock market. In the late 1920s, the market detached from reality and became a national obsession. Stories of shoeshine boys and secretaries making fortunes overnight fueled a speculative frenzy. The magic ingredient was a practice called buying on margin. An investor could put down as little as 10% of a stock's price and borrow the other 90% from their broker. As long as prices kept rising, it was a foolproof path to riches. Stories of shoeshine boys and secretaries making fortunes overnight fueled a speculative frenzy. The magic ingredient was a practice called buying on margin. This created a dangerous bubble. By 1929, the total value of these brokers' loans was enormous. While some sources exaggerate the figure, a reliable estimate places the value of margin loans at nearly 20% of the entire New York Stock Exchange's market value. It was a house of cards built on the belief that the market could only go up. In October 1929, that belief shattered. The bubble burst. On Black Thursday, October 24th, the market plunged. A group of powerful bankers tried to stop the bleeding by buying up stocks, creating a brief false rally, but it was too late. The following week, on Black Tuesday, the floor gave out completely. Panic selling ensued. In a matter of days, billions of dollars in paper wealth, equivalent to hundreds of billions today, evaporated. Panic selling ensued. In a matter of days, billions of dollars in paper wealth, equivalent to hundreds of billions today, evaporated. But here's the crucial point. The stock market crash of 1929 did not, by itself, cause the Great Depression. It was the trigger. It was the violent event that exposed and catastrophically amplified all the deeper weaknesses that had been festering throughout the Roaring '20s. The crushing farm debt that had hollowed out rural America and the fragile, unregulated banking system built on a knife's edge. The crash turned these cracks into chasms, setting the stage for a decade of unprecedented economic hardship. After the crash, Americans panicked. They rushed to banks to withdraw their money, but the banks didn't have enough cash. From 1930 to 1933, around 9,000 banks failed, not the 5,000 that is sometimes quoted. In 1933 alone, over 4,000 banks shut their doors. The Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, made a critical mistake. Instead of expanding the money supply to calm the panic, it allowed it to shrink. The U.S. money supply contracted by nearly 30%, prices collapsed, businesses couldn't borrow, farmers couldn't refinance. What could have been a severe recession spiraled into a catastrophic depression. Economist Milton Friedman would later call this the greatest failure of the Federal Reserve in its history. But the Great Depression wasn't just an American story. Thanks to the international gold standard, the crisis spread worldwide. Here's how it worked. Countries backed their currencies with gold. If the US experienced deflation, other countries had to tighten their monetary policies to maintain fixed exchange rates. That meant higher interest rates and shrinking money supplies around the globe. Britain, Germany, France, Canada, Australia, all were dragged down. By 1932, global industrial production had collapsed. In Germany, unemployment soared to 6 million, paving the way for political extremism and the rise of Adolf Hitler. In this sense, the Depression wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a political and social earthquake that reshaped the 20th century. Statistics can only go so far. To really understand the Great Depression, we have to look at its human cost. By 1933, U.S. industrial production had fallen nearly 50%. 1 in every 4 Americans was jobless, about 12 to 13 million people. Breadlines stretched across city blocks. Families packed their belongings into old cars and moved west in search of work, immortalized in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Farmers in the Midwest faced a double blow. Not only were crop prices collapsing, but nature added insult to injury. The Dust Bowl. Years of drought and poor soil practices turned fertile lands into deserts, driving hundreds of thousands of families off their farms. Suicides rose, birth rates fell. For many, hope itself seemed to vanish. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in 1933, he declared a bank holiday. All banks were closed, and only the stable ones were allowed to reopen. This restored some confidence. Soon after, the FDIC was created, guaranteeing deposits up to a certain amount. Americans could finally trust that their money was safe. Roosevelt's New Deal brought massive government intervention, public works projects, Social Security, labor protections, and financial reforms. It didn't end the Depression overnight, but it gave people jobs, dignity, and hope. The ultimate recovery, however, came with World War II. Wartime spending ended mass unemployment and jump-started industrial production. By the 1940s, the Great Depression was history, but its scars remained. Now we come to the question haunting this story. Could another Great Depression happen today? It's not just an academic exercise. The memory of that decade is a ghost that reappears whenever markets tremble. Economists are divided. Some believe we've built a fortress against such a catastrophe. Others warn that we're simply living in a different kind of glass house. On one hand, the optimists have a point. Our financial architecture is stronger. The FDIC ensures bank deposits, a game-changing policy that prevents the kind of bank runs that crippled the 1930s economy. This psychological backstop is monumental. Furthermore, central banks like the Federal Reserve have learned the harsh lessons of the past. Instead of tightening the money supply as they did then, their modern playbook involves acting quickly. As seen in the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic, they inject massive amounts of liquidity into the system, preventing a credit freeze and keeping the gears of the economy turning instead of letting it collapse. But on the other hand, risks are real and have evolved. Global debt is now over $313 trillion, higher than ever in history. This mountain of borrowing by governments, corporations, and households makes the system incredibly sensitive to rising interest rates, which could trigger a wave of defaults. At the same time, inequality is extreme. The richest 1% own around 43% of global wealth, according to Oxfam. This isn't just a moral issue. It hollows out the consumer base that drives growth and can fuel political instability, eerily mirroring the conditions of the late 1920s. Financial markets remain fragile. The wild speculation in areas like cryptocurrency, with its extreme volatility, echoes the risky margin buying of the 1920s. But today's dangers are amplified by speed and complexity. Global interconnection means that a crisis in one major economy can spread instantly worldwide, much faster than through the gold standard a century ago. A crisis can ricochet across the globe in milliseconds. And here's the chilling part. While today's systems may prevent a repeat of the exact 1930s scenario, they could also create new, unexpected crises. Think Think of a sophisticated cyber attack on the banking system, freezing payments and erasing confidence in an instant. Or algorithmic trading causing a flash crash faster than any human can react. We also face sudden collapses in over-leveraged sectors and geopolitical shocks that ripple through trade, severing supply chains and destabilizing markets. So, yes, another Great Depression is possible. It wouldn't be a carbon copy with breadlines and Dust Bowl migrations. It would be a modern version shaped by today's vulnerabilities, our digital dependencies, our unprecedented debt, and our deep-seated inequality. The next crisis won't be a rerun of history, but a new chapter written by the unique challenges of our time, reminding us that the price of stability is constant vigilance. The Great Depression wasn't caused by a single event. It was the result of reckless speculation, fragile banks, policy failures, and a rigid global system that spread shocks worldwide. And the lesson is clear: economic prosperity is more fragile than we think. The next time you see stock markets soaring or headlines about record debt, remember the 1930s. The world has collapsed before, and it could again. So, can the Great Depression happen again? The honest answer, yes, but probably not in the same way. We've built protections, but we've also built new risks. The system may not break exactly as it did in 1929, but history shows us that no system is unbreakable. Now let me ask you, if the world faced another economic collapse tomorrow, how prepared would you be? Could you endure months without a stable job or banking system? Because the scariest truth of all is that while economies recover, the people who live through these collapses never forget them. This was Decoding Point, where we uncover the systems that shape our world. Today, we decoded the Great Depression, but this story is part of a bigger picture. Think about it. The Great Depression was triggered by a financial collapse. But what if tomorrow the collapse wasn't financial, but digital? We explored that terrifying possibility in our earlier video. What if the internet disappeared tomorrow? Watch it next, and you'll see how fragile our modern world really is.